Welcome to Apologetics 101. My name is Mark Moser, and this is our first session together. Well, what do we have here? We have a course on apologetics, which is typically described as the defense of the Christian faith. At least Christian apologetics is that. We'll find out that it's actually a little bit more than just the defense of the Christian faith, and we'll get there. But before we get into terminology, methodology, history of philosophy, worldview analysis, culture, all these wonderful topics we'll be getting to, let's first just have an easy, fun intro by looking at some famous and maybe not so famous apologists. And maybe they don't even like the term apologist. Some of them might not. But all of them in some way are doing apologetics. So let's take a look. Let's jump right into maybe the most famous of all people in this wall, and that is C.S. Lewis, Clive Staples Lewis. Now, sometimes, as the first bullet says, C.S. Lewis wrote very clearly and directly as an apologist defending the Christian faith. Book on miracles, Problem of Pain. I think, however, he's more famous for, and rightly so, his children's literature, Chronicles of Narnia. And in these books, he subtly illustrated the Christian faith, and maybe you could say even subtly argued for it. And just so many things were just beautifully illustrated by these stories. I would give him credit for just personally, first and foremost, for Aslan, the lion. What a great choice for illustrating Christ himself. He's good, but he's not safe. And I think many Christians have felt like C.S. Lewis got that right. Even when we many times make Jesus sound very safe, whether consciously or not, C.S. Lewis was right in saying he's not safe, but he's good. Very, very interesting. Last bullet, unpack the Christian faith insightfully. Take mere Christianity. How about the chapter on pride? He unpacks that. Why is that so evil in the Christian worldview, from the Christian perspective? Why is it so terrible, pride? Just does a great job of insightfully elaborating on that. Includes a good amount on the Trinity. Hey, this is supposed to be mere Christianity. Does he need to talk about the doctrine of the Trinity, as complex as that is and mysterious? Yes. He recognized that is a part of mere Christianity. He's a risky guy. Myth, fantasy. This was not the heyday for myth and fantasy like you might say it is today. And even using magic, the magician's nephew, where magic isn't all bad, that's risky. A lot of Christians are going to know their Old Testament where it looks like magic is a very bad thing. He's talking about it in a different sense, is he? Maybe? Risky guy. His theology has been questioned at various points. A second chance after death to believe in Christ? Did he say that? Did he advocate that? Views on evolution, number of different things. But, no doubt, he has had a massive impact, and I have talked to so many Christians and non-Christians who have really benefited from his writings, and I'm one. Let's move over to J. Gresham Machen. Also a black and white photo, so you might presume that he is dead, and that is true. Who is this guy? J. Gresham Machen is a New Testament scholar, was a New Testament scholar, so not a literature professor like C.S. Lewis, so much different person here. He studied in Germany, and very interesting, important fact there is that he struggled with liberalism. Now, the liberalism I'm referring to here is liberal Protestantism, the old German liberal Protestantism, which was a bit anti-supernatural, moralistic, not Orthodox Christianity. Well, his Orthodox faith survived Germany. He came back, taught at Princeton, but when Princeton is reorganized and the modernist liberal forces take control of the institution, J. Gresham Machen and other professors leave to found Westminster Theological Seminary in 1929 in lovely Glenside, Pennsylvania. Now, I have chosen this book to focus on J. Gresham Machen as an apologist, Christianity and liberalism. And can I tell you what "and" means here? Versus. It could be Christianity versus liberalism. These two things are very different, and he pits them against each other. Let me read. In my little book, I tried to show that the issue in the church of the present day is not between two varieties of the same religion, but at bottom, this is important, between two essentially different types of thought and life. You get that? He's not saying, hey, this is Presbyterians versus Lutherans, two different denominations within the same Orthodox faith. He's saying, no, what's coming up now in German liberal Protestantism is a completely different religion. Let's keep reading. There is much interlocking of the branches, but the two tendencies, modernism, which is closely related to liberalism, and supernaturalism, the Orthodox faith, which has a heavy dose of supernaturalism, obviously, or otherwise designated non-doctrinal religion, again, modernist liberalism, and historic Christianity, spring from different roots. In particular, I tried to show that Christianity is not a life as distinguished from a doctrine, and not a life that has doctrine as its changing symbolic expression, but that, exactly the other way around, here it comes, what's Orthodox Christianity? It is a life founded on a doctrine. Not just a life, or a life with some kind of changing doctrine, symbolic expression stuff. A life founded on a doctrine. I remember reading some secular observer who read this book way back in the 20s and said, now we get it. Now we see why there's such a battle within the Christian church between these two forces. And that's a testimony to the effectiveness of this work. Let's go to someone still alive. Alvin Plantinga. Alvin Plantinga, remarkably influential. And he's not a literature professor like C.S. Lewis. He's not a New Testament scholar like J. Gresham Machen. This guy is a top-notch professional philosopher. Massive impact in the field of philosophy. And I'm not just talking about Christian circles. In fact, the field is not nearly as atheistic as it was 40 years ago. And that's to a large degree due to Plantinga's influence. And other Christian philosophers too. Nicholas Wolterstorff comes up. I'm going to name another one here in a moment. William Lane Craig. There's a number of them. He taught at Notre Dame University for a long time, and before that, Calvin College. Now, let me give you a taste of Alvin Plantinga, but to do so, I'm going to first talk about William Lane Craig, another influential Christian philosopher and apologist. Now, William Lane Craig is going to argue for the existence of God through the Kalam cosmological argument, which originally, interestingly enough, was a Muslim argument centuries ago. Now, he revitalized it, and one of the reasons he revitalized this argument was because Big Bang cosmology really gave it new force. First premise, whatever begins to exist has a cause. 2, the universe began to exist. He argues for that philosophically, but also can marshal scientific evidence. Big Bang cosmology says that time and space had a beginning. My understanding with the recent material coming from Stephen Hawking is when he talks about before the Big Bang, that's still in imaginary time. He has not come back to real time in his work. So when he talks about before the Big Bang, that doesn't mean there really was something before it except in imaginary time. Now, that's my understanding of it. I've seen a lot of people say that that's exactly what Hawking is doing. Now, the universe began to exist. 3, therefore, the universe has a cause. It didn't just poof into existence. That's premise 1. And should we add to this, the cause is probably a personal agent. So William Lane Craig argues that God would be the agent for this universe coming into existence, the cause. Now, that's a traditional argument for God. It's now aided by Big Bang cosmology, but the structure looks fairly familiar and classic. Here's Alvin Plantinga. Listen how different this is. Belief in God can be rational and justified even without arguments or evidence for the existence of God. No arguments? No evidence? Belief in God is properly basic. That means it's a part of your foundation of your belief structure, claims Plantinga, and therefore belief in God could be justified independently of evidence. Now that might sound like just a mere jump of faith. Fideistic, we call that. But actually, this is a whole lot more persuasive than you might think. Now, one way Plantinga begins to argue for this is, for instance, there's well-known things in philosophy that cannot be proved by reason, but it seems like all philosophers and normal people take via common sense. Like, for instance, how can you prove that there are other minds? You have your own mind, you're thinking. How do you know there are other minds and other people around you aren't just automatons, robots? How do you know there are other minds? Well, God could be one of those other minds out there. You can't prove even a human mind. Your wife, your husband, do they really have a mind? Maybe God is in the same category. And that's just really the initial way he started to argue in the 1960s, and it grew impressively from that. Big impact to the professional philosophy community. Now, more Plantinga's work. I'm not going to read through this. I'll just mention the first one, Evolutionary Argument Against Naturalism. Read that carefully. That's saying evolution is a problem for naturalism. Naturalism is a strong variant of atheism. Evolution is a problem for atheism. Very interesting. Now, at the bottom, for our consideration in this course, Christian philosophers often aren't fully reformed in their theology, and you could say Plantinga's in this category, even though he's known for advancing so-called reformed epistemology. A libertarian free will, for instance, he assumes. He argues against divine simplicity, that is, God without parts. That's usually the quick introduction to what the traditional doctrine of simplicity is. God does not have parts. He's not a complicated or a composite being. He argues against that, not saying that God has parts exactly, but simplicity actually becomes more sophisticated. That's kind of ironic, isn't it? The doctrine of simplicity becomes complex. And he argues against that. So it's not your traditional Reformed orthodoxy. So that's just something to note. Do Christian philosophers respect problems that Scripture leaves as mystery? That's the second thing. Trying to be very, very rational. Maybe there's some things that the Bible just leaves as mystery, and they try to solve things we can't solve. I know certainly a number of people feel that way. Well, we won't be able to solve that question here, but I just want to bring that up. That is something that we might return to in some capacity. Next to him, Stephen Meyer. Wait, Stephen Meyer, he's an intelligent design theorist. Is he really out there defending Christianity directly? Well, he is a Christian, and I don't know if he would call himself a Christian apologist, but he is definitely doing things that Christian apologists and Christians in general have appreciated and felt like defending the faith. Well, he is a historian and philosopher of science, PhD Cambridge. A leading advocate of intelligent design with other folks like Bill Dembski, who has written a book on Christian apologetics, Michael Behe, the biochemist from Lehigh University, Jonathan Wells. These men are all associated with the Discovery Institute. Now, recently he has written 2 bestsellers, Signature in the Cell, talking about DNA as information. DNA is not like information, it is information for building proteins, and everything that comes out of proteins, of course, are impacted by DNA. The point is, every place we know where there's information, there is the presence of an intelligent designer who created that information. Darwin's Doubt just came out recently in 2013, and that also is a New York Times bestseller. This one on the so-called Cambrian explosion in the fossil record and how Darwinism really has a difficulty explaining that. And Darwin himself was quite aware of that. Now, Mayer's impact, pretty big. As you might guess, with two New York Times bestsellers, that would be the case. Great example, though, I have in the first bullet there, famous NYU atheist philosopher Tom Nagel. He named Mayer's Signature in the Cell as a book of the year in the Times Literary Supplement. That's a big deal in the UK and a big deal in the world. An atheist says this book is causing me problems. These intelligent design theorists causing me problems. A real raw honesty from Nagel. Got to appreciate the guy. He says, I don't want there to be a universe where there's a God. I know plenty of Christians. I don't think they're stupid. I don't think I'm smarter than them. I'd like to say that maybe, but really, I don't want there to be a God in this universe. That's the kind of honest guy he is, and he sees Mayer's book and where it's going, and he's really been complimentary of it. Down at the bottom, for our consideration, intelligent designer isn't identified with God. Think about that. At least the intelligent design community isn't doing that as part of their intelligent design theory. Well, God, it may be, and the advocates, almost all of them believe that it is the traditional monotheistic God. Not all of them, though. Not identified with God. And the point is, they're saying that's not science. Science can't tell you that the intelligent designer is God. That's a philosophical or theological argument. Now, that's very interesting. Is that Christian apologetics, then? Something to think about. How about follow the evidence? That advice. Is that appropriate advice, or is it naive or dangerous evidentialism? Now, we're going to have to talk about that later in the course. But the point is, follow the evidence. Is the evidence neutral? Self-interpreting? That's a big question. And some have said that that's a kind of a naivete of intelligent design. Follow the evidence. Now, that might be the case. That might not be the case. We'll see near the end of the course. We're going to come back to intelligent design and look at it a little bit more carefully. But it is very powerful today and worth looking into. All right, that's Stephen C. Meyer. Now, Greg Kugel. Now, again, I'm choosing these folks for different reasons. Now, Greg Kugel, I'm choosing. One reason is he came online very early in the 1990s, along with these guys. I see it at the bottom here. Glenn Miller, ChristianThinkTank.com, Matthew Slick, Hugh Ross. These are old Christian apologetic websites going way back to the 20th century. And that's one reason to mention Kugel. But I want to mention him for this book. A lot of apologetics is very theoretical, theological, technical, but here's a book for just practical advice for your ordinary Christian who wants to do some kind of apologetics and probably an evangelism. And this is gleaned from his decades of experience. Worth reading once again. Now, for our consideration, if you have a book that's so practically oriented without a lot of theology or theory or whatever, could it not be maybe robust enough? That could be the case. I'm not saying that's the case with this book. Actually, I think overall this book is quite good, quite helpful. But that's always a worry when something just jumps right into practice. All right. Ravi Zacharias. Now, I have chosen him obviously because his hair is incredible. What can we say about him other than his hair, though? Ravi Zacharias, born in India. Chosen him for a couple reasons here that you see next in this list. He's oriented towards existential issues, whereas a lot of apologetics is very rigorously argued, like Alvin Plantinga, or historically argued. Some of that is J. Gresham Machen. Existential issues of life. Look at that second book on the right there. Can man live without God? Meaningfulness or meaninglessness. Ethics. What's it all about? Also, religious pluralism. He's from India. He knows religious pluralism. Even within that thing we call Hinduism, there's incredible pluralism, incredible diversity within Hinduism. I'll never forget listening to a course on Hinduism from the teaching company. And this Hindu scholar starts off by saying, Hinduism is the religion of India. And he says, there is no such thing as Hinduism, and there is no such thing as India. So much for saying Hinduism is the religion of India. Well, what he's talking about there is the incredible diversity of Hinduism. It's really a family of religions. And India, the subcontinent we call India, is not what you think it is either. Very interesting. So he knows religious pluralism, and he knows it, being not from the West too, which means he knows the East and the West. Just makes him very powerful, very knowledgeable, effective speaker. Maybe the best speaker out of everyone I'm highlighting. High praise from Chuck Colson here, the great apologist of our time. Ravi Zacharias. All right, now I'm moving through these in no particular order. For some reason I chose counterclockwise, I think, here as far as the major frames. So that would mean F.F. Bruce is up next. F.F. Bruce has passed away. He was a New Testament scholar. Huge impact on previous generation of evangelical Bible scholars and laymen and preachers, theologians. So again, like J. Gresham Machen, probably his major impact is within the Christian church itself. What can we say here? I saw a poll. I think it was a book by Mark Knoll, a historian, and he was polling Christian scholars, I think, in the 80s. I hope I get this right. And he was asking, who are your major influences? And F.F. Bruce was the top of the list, number 1 or number 2, for a number of different types of scholars and theologians. Very impressive guy. One book he's very famous for in the apologetic realm is the New Testament documents, Are They Reliable? And a lot of people became familiar with this work. How many manuscripts are there? More than 5,000 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. Maybe another 20,000 in other languages, which were translated from the original Greek. He, walks through the evidence. How much of it has been changed? How stable has the text been? Very impressive there. And a lot of people found out from a book like this that, what do you know, the New Testament has incredible manuscript evidence for its reliability. The canon of Scripture also, look how much later that is. I think that's the original publication date, 88, if I looked that up correctly. He was active for a long time, this guy. So canonization is a big issue, especially in light of Dan Brown novels and scandals within the Catholic Church recently. It seems like common sense to a lot of people that the Christian canon was probably created by a bunch of guys in some smoke-filled room for maybe not the best reasons, self-interest, whatever, and they chose the books that fulfilled their ideology or whatever. These kind of conspiracy theories or whatever seem to be not just plausible, but almost, like I said, common sense or conventional wisdom to a lot of people. And so the canon of Scripture is a helpful book to show you that that's not the case, especially something from Dan Brown's work is seriously not the case, as any scholar can tell you, any New Testament scholar. Kenneth Kitchen. Now, he might be the least known of everyone I'm focusing on. He's an Egyptologist. An expert on the ancient Near East, which includes Israel and its neighbors. This book on the reliability of the Old Testament came out about 10 years ago or so. I mean by that 2003, I think. It maintains the historicity of the Old Testament. The Old Testament is real history. It is massively documented. It will show you and tell you of all the potential sources we have for all the periods of the Old Testament. You want to know what archaeology has dug up? Look at that. You want to know what the Babylonian Chronicle can tell us and when what dates it covers? Read that. What do we know from the Mari tablets? What do we know from, of course, Egypt? So forth. Massively documented. He basically goes through everything, tells you when sources are silent, when sources are active, why certain sources were preserved, why other ones were not, so forth. Very powerful. Now, who else? Let's go to our last frame here, and let's jump into Cornelius Van Til. Well, he taught at Westminster Theological Seminary for decades. I mentioned Westminster earlier. Incredibly influential upon Reformed apologetics. Innovator. And you might know the term presuppositional with Van Til. He's known for founding presuppositional apologetics. Although, warning here, this is an overused term. Other folks are known for advocating presuppositional apologetics, but with significant differences from Van Til. Now, Van Til's apologetics, unabashed reliance upon revelation. So it's not just going to be me reasoning under some tree and through my brute force reasoning telling you Christianity is true. No, it's going to be thoroughly about the Bible. That special revelation, more on revelation coming up in a later lecture. But he's unabashedly going to rely upon that. Van Til's strengths, theology and philosophy, very astute theologically and philosophically. He's not a polymath. He's not a generalist, I think we could say, like other folks are, like our next person, Francis Schaeffer, but very, very astute theologically and philosophically and at a technical level. Now, some key Van Til disciples, K. Scott Oliphant, teaches at Westminster. Greg Bahnsen passed away at a younger age than we would have hoped, maybe back in the 1990s. He was a key Van Tilian disciple. And John Frame, still teaching at Orlando RTS, and still writing, has written tons, and a lot of free lectures from him online. What can we say? Well, out of these apologists, I think it's fair to say, unfortunately, Cornelius Van Til might have been the worst communicator of them all, not the clearest. And he knew that. Everyone seems to admit this. That doesn't mean that he is enigmatic and you can never understand him, far from it. But you have to get inside his circle of thought, be patient with him, and climb that mountain. He's strong in apologetical theory and method. How to apply him practically is not always clear or agreed upon, at least by his followers and his the people enthusiastic about him. And I would put myself in that category. He's not always the most practically oriented in his writings either. So those are two things about his communication. Not always clear and not always practically oriented, or at least not always clearly practically oriented. All right, moving on. Francis Schaeffer. Now, he is a man who studied 1 year under Van Til, but he's known for founding L'Abri in Switzerland. L'Abri stands for the shelter in French. With his wife Edith, he clearly is a figure. We need to talk about his wife very quickly. Francis and Edith were quite a team in founding the apologetic community. I think it was Francis who said, you can't just read my books. If you want to know me, you got to read my wife's books too, because she's writing things that I totally agree with too. So apologetic community, what is that? Real answers for honest questions. If you're struggling with nihilism, go to L'Abri. You'll have to work for 4 hours a day, but the rest of the day we'll talk about tough issues. We'll put you on a reading plan. You can listen to lectures. We'll have honest conversations. And they're famously hospitable. You know, terrible folks, terrible folks, folks with terrible problems coming in, you know, drug addiction and so forth. Famously hospitable. Love is the final apologetic, the final defense of the faith. I think it was John Frame I heard recently say that he feels that Francis Schaeffer's disciples had a tremendous balance. And to this day, they have just a tremendous balance in love of the heart, emphasizing that, but truth of the mind, keeping that all together in one lovely piece. Known for scope, too, that last bullet. Francis Schaeffer is talking about all of Western history, philosophy, art, government, politics, pollution, scope of his thought. On the right there, a couple of Schaeffer's disciples, I think you call them, Nancy Pearcey. Very impressive thinker. Total Truth, she wrote. Very helpful book. Jerram Barrs, teaching over at Covenant Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. Again, just a great apologist, worth listening to and reading. For our consideration, Francis Schaeffer, comprehensive thinker, but accused of swashbuckling, overly simplified tours through Western history. That might be true. But seems like whenever you write history, things are always overly simplified to a certain degree. But maybe his is overly simplified to a worrisome degree. I know certainly a number of people feel that way. How different is his presuppositionalism from Van Til's? Well, that's something we're going to have to look at later lessons. Two more. David Powlison. Hey, this guy lives down the street from me. David Powlison teaches at Westminster Seminary also. He's been influenced by Van Til. He's a key thinker and leader of the Christian Counseling and Educational Foundation, CCEF. But the first bullet there, I skipped. PhD from University of Pennsylvania in History of Science and Medicine. Very interesting. History of Science and Medicine, which makes him a very insightful critic of secular psychology. And that's why I'm including him, is because I don't think we had an apologist in this list who really interacted insightfully and thoroughly with psychology. Now, he's not writing in an apologetic with an apologetic purpose and in apologetic venues that often. Here's one book on the right, though, Psychology and Christianity, where he is resisting any kind of thorough integration of Christianity with secular psychology. And I've seen him teach on secular psychology very impressively in classroom settings. Worth reading. Finally, we have this guy. This is obviously Captain Jean-Luc Picard. This is Tim Keller. Now, why do we have Tim Keller here? Well, preacher, church planner, seminary professor. Hey, this guy knows how to bring apologetics to the pulpit. And so if you want to hear apologetics done subtly, but appropriately, persuasively in sermons, I think Dr. Keller is one of the best. And particularly for fine-tuning his preaching for a very secular and liberal New York City context. And we've seen just an explosion of Reformed churches planted in the New York City metropolitan area to the glory of God and to Keller's credit to a certain degree. I got up there The Reason for God. That also a New York Times bestseller from a few years ago. Helpful reading for applied apologetics, again, applying apologetics to a secular audience. Well, there we have it. Who's doing apologetics? We looked at these 12 men, but we dove in and actually looked at a couple other men and a lady too. So we're going to carry on from this session, and we're going to start diving into the warrant for apologetics, the biblical warrant. Why are we doing apologetics? Is it because we want to argue with people and be jerks? I hope not. It's because the Bible warrants it. It calls for it. So that will be our next session.